Rhonda, the Chevron website says that, quotes some international scientists as saying that warming is unequivocal and human activity is most likely the cause. So I just want to, it seems like the company accepts that. Fatih Birol, who is the chief economist of the International Energy Agency, said recently, told Reuters last year, that current projections for greenhouse gases are on track to reach 11 degrees of Fahrenheit warming by mid-century. 11 degrees. We've had about 1 degree so far, so that's 10 more degrees in the next 40 years. What does that look like for Chevron, for the economy, 11 degrees of warming? This is the chief economist at the foremost world's energy authority talking about that.
Well, Greg, I'm not a climate scientist, so I'm not even qualified to address what 11 degrees means for kind of Chevron on the economy. What I can tell you is that we share the concerns of the government and public about climate change. We think prudent action is the right thing to do. And you have to look to a company like Chevron to say, okay, so how can we contribute to this issue? For our part, we are spending billions of dollars to reduce the flares, mostly in our sub-Saharan African operations, and Fred talked about methane being one of the most potent.
Flare meaning burning of excess.
Burning of natural gas that comes up with the oil that can't make its way to a market because there really are no domestic markets that are that mature in the Africa area where we produce it. So we're spending billions to either re-inject, convert that gas to diesel, or get it into LNG and ship it to foreign markets. We are a participant in 2 of the largest carbon sequestration projects being developed in the industry today, one with our Gorgon LNG project in Australia, and one in an oil sands operation with Shell. So we're the largest looking at the sequestration arena. As Fred mentioned, we have a company dedicated to energy services and energy efficiency and renewables installation. We're doing demonstration projects of solar to steam right here in San Joaquin Valley. In California, we have researched over 100 feedstocks and 50 conversion technologies trying to crack the code on cellulosic biofuel. So just to name a few, and we are one of the largest producers of renewable energy, particularly for an international oil company, by the virtue of our geothermal operations in the Asia-Pacific region. And so when you think, how can we contribute to the issue, I think you look at how are we finding the engineering solutions that can be done cost effectively at scale? And I would say at the last 10 years, Chevron has looked at everything from renewables technology to sequestration technology to spending billions to put out flares to try to get our arms around what can be done, what can be scaled, what can compete in the market, and that's where you should look for our contribution.
And when you look to the future, do you have a shadow price on carbon? Some oil companies have $35 a price. ConocoPhillips, I think, is $35. Do you sort of plan in a price on carbon when you look to the future?
Absolutely. We look at the markets around the world and we operate in a number of areas today that are already operating under carbon markets, the European Union being one, Australia being another, parts of Canada being another. So what we do for all of our capital projects kind of include the cost of carbon in them, depending on the jurisdiction. So yes, we do account for our estimates of how carbon markets will evolve looking at our capital expenditures.
And a report came out recently that the average among industrialized economies is about $70 per, I think it's per ton of carbon. The US price is about $7. This was from the OECD and the New York Times of last week. So the question is, Fred Krupp, is the price on carbon high enough in the United States compared to other developed economies? I think Mexico was the only country that had a lower price on carbon than the United States.
Well, no. We need to put a price on carbon and greenhouse gas pollution. We need to put caps in place so that we are effectively reducing emissions. The Environmental Defense Fund, is open-minded about what policies will work, caps, cap and trade, tax, whatever. The test is, does it get emissions down? And there's got to be urgency. You quote Fatih Birol talking about the potential temperature rise if we continue on the high emission scenario. Unfortunately, we've been on the high emission scenario for the last 2 decades. But we are now seeing the sort of extreme weather events that are waking people up. Tragically, in the United States, 11 events in 2012 with effects of over $1 billion. I was affected in my home by Sandy, not nearly in the way that many people were who lost their homes or had severe damage. I was just out of power for 8 days.
But your office is in the 20s in Lower Manhattan.
My office was out of power. No one was allowed into the building for a week. But, you know, we got off easy compared to the real victims. But, you know, maybe because of that in part, we're emerging from 2 years of climate silence in the United States, where no one would talk about this. We have the President of the United States in his inaugural address saying it very well: if we fail to address climate change, we will betray our children and future generations. And beyond that, in Davos a couple of weeks ago, we had the head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, say, if we don't solve climate change, future generations will be roasted, toasted, grilled, and fried. You know, if I said that, I don't think it would even be
but you don't have
picked up in the press.
The French accent that she has, the panache, come on.
She sits at the center of our international financial community. That's her assessment. She hadn't talked about climate change for a while before that. But it was not only her, it was Dr. Jim Kim, the president of the World Bank, who, when asked to address the Davos crowd, spent 7 of his 10 minutes talking about the fact that the most impoverishing force on the face of the planet right now is climate change and extreme weather. And the World Bank, whose mission is to prevent and ameliorate poverty, has got to get more involved. So when you have the head of the IMF, the president of the World Bank, the president of the United States talking this way, I think there is hope, but we need more than hope, we need action. And while talk is just talk, you know, silence has been very expensive up until now, and through leadership and talk, the president's got the opportunity now to connect the dots for the American public so that we can get back to a time where it's possible to envision Congress taking the action that this country desperately needs to take. I can't envision that happening in the next year, or maybe even the next 2 years, Congress acting, but I can imagine the president leading a conversation that prepares the country and Congress to act.